Chapter 3.
Arise.
Dare blinked her eyes open and wondered when she'd fallen asleep. It had seemed so impossible. "Morning," she croaked through a dry throat as she eased out of bed. It was the room she'd shared with her brother and sister all her life. Emil had become a lord scribe years ago, but now she couldn't find Chera in the morning light. Riordan nodded and left the bedroom. She dressed rapidly and breathed out as she cinched on the sword. She'd cut a length of leather from the belt and had sewn it back together to make it fit. The blade felt awkward with the weight on one hip, but she liked it. She picked up her boots and backpack, then tiptoed into the kitchen. She inhaled. Every morning she came out to the airy and sweet scent of dough rising. Her mouth watered at the thought. It baked while she was in the fields, and when she and her father returned for breakfast, its promise had become divine. But the room was empty of scent, without even the dream of it. She cast her gaze to the wood-burning stove. It was cold. Her father stood near the door to her bedchamber while her mother, Roisia, sat at the table next to her older sister. They were both pale as they watched her. Dare stared into Chera's eyes, the same green as her own, although her hair was lighter, like their mother's. Beside them was some of yesterday's bread, as well as mounds of vegetables, wrapped cheese, and smoked meat.
Put socks on.
Riordan pointed at the boot she was carrying. "Yes, sir." She set her backpack down and reached into it. Her sword banged on the floor as she bent. She cursed under her breath and imagined what he must be thinking. When she had both socks and boots on, she straightened out the rest of her clothing, including the sword belt. Then she turned to face Riordan. In the pre-dawn light, she saw him more as the knight in training he used to be than her dad. His inspecting eyes did not disappoint the vision. He held out a sealed scroll.
You must swear to deliver this to Count Calloway.
He did not release his grip as she grasped it. She met his gaze. "I swear I will deliver this to Count Calloway." She felt him hesitate to let go, but he gave up the scroll's weight.
When you get to the Count's, use my name. They'll know it, or at least they should. I spent half my life there.
Roisia forced a smile as she stood from the table. She swept the food into a cloth bag and passed it along to Dare, who slipped it into her backpack. Her mother also handed her a coin purse. "I know there's not much use for money out here, but you'll need it in the city." Dare opened her mouth to decline, but then wrapped her fingers around the purse. Chera stood, holding something white and square in her hands. Dare squinted. A staff bursting with bright flowers decorated the handsel. Her sister whispered, "It's the walking staff of Amiri, so you'll have good fortune on your travels." "Thank you." Dare folded the handkerchief into the coin purse and then tied that to her belt.
I was nervous enough when Emil left. Riordan walked to the window in the house's front room and looked out. I don't know anything of the current court. We may be friends with old enemies or enemies with former allies.
He pointed through the grayness to where the sun would rise.
Out in the world, you'll need everything I've taught you to survive long enough to learn what you'll actually need to know. I only pray I've taught you enough.
He pulled her into a brief embrace.
When your sister was born, when I held her, I knew what I had wasn't a life I could cherish.
He blew out a sigh and stepped away from her.
Farewell, my daughter. You have my permission to return when you will. Until that day, may Carinth grant you many blessings and Zine many victories.
She nodded, feeling a tightness in her chest. She didn't know what she could say, so she turned, opened the door, and stepped outside. She walked down the path from the house and glanced at the barn, where the farmhands and her father would hustle to work soon enough. River's Bridge was quiet, and the world dim. She ventured onto the stone bridge and stopped halfway across to listen to the water. She could make out its gentle flow in the early light. How she had ignored this simple beauty for so many years. And she would not see it again any time soon. And she was all right with that, she realized, as she walked off the bridge. But she'd miss her family and friends. She thought of Donley, Kelin, and Device safe asleep in their beds. But a grin accumulated as she walked, and her step came with some spring to it. She started to whistle Victory Over the Bridge, thinking it vaguely fitting. Her song died in mid-note as she passed the last house. "Kelin, what are you doing here?"
"Oh, I thought I'd finally walk up to Dulangar for the guild examination."
He paused, as if he'd been rehearsing.
"Aren't you going the same way?"
He twirled a walking staff, and she caught him eyeing the sword at her side. He shifted his own backpack, and she heard metal scraping against metal inside. She also saw a sheath tied to its outside, encasing a blade she'd never seen before. He leaned forward and wheezed, putting his weight into the staff. "Indeed I am." She couldn't help but smile.
"Might I journey with you then?"
"Of course, but," she pointed, "why are you carrying a sword? I want to see it."
"When the sun's up."
They began to walk.
"I wonder how many riders are out there, hunting in groups, only they're stalking a man instead of a deer."
"Don't know." Then she added, "Let's not forget about ogres, dragons, or even vampires. Perhaps even a few Kemen."
"Kemen? Everyone knows that the Storm Raiders aren't real."
He stopped mid-stride.
"But were they?"
Dare shrugged. Brief remnants of campfire stories about creatures that drained life or something flitted across her mind. "I think they were killed off in the Chentum Wars." She chuckled. "The elves would know. Perhaps we'll meet some. Or dwarves, too. Wouldn't that be incredible?"
"Need to get to the city first,"
he chided. Then his tone darkened.
"Without running into anyone else."
They struck out across the meadow. On the far side, the trees thickened around them until they were no longer able to see the village.